Hello everybody, today we're going to talk about Bleach. We have Unahona versus Ulquiorra. It's been talked about a lot, and people have made flawed conclusions about it. I won't delay it, I think Ulquiorra claps. But in this video, we'll dive deeper to understand why I think so, and even if you don't agree with the result, may also help you come to your own conclusion. I'll be addressing why different people think otherwise. First we have DBZ Imran. Let's hear him.
This will mean she'll have access to her terrifying Bankai Minazuki, which is able to melt flesh from bone.
First off, it's not confirmed whether Unahona's Bankai melts Zaraki symbolically or physically, because it might be a metaphor for Zaraki melting away his mental restriction, in which case is not a point worth addressing. So let's say what's happening on the screen is literal. It's still not a point worth addressing because the part of Zaraki that melted is the part that got drenched in her Minazuki, and only after a long period, because Zaraki already said he was melting before any change happens. Therefore, it wouldn't be a problem for someone who can counteract with their own regenerative powers. And it's not even useful as extra damage because they've been fighting for a while. But the only part that melts is the part that got drenched when Zaraki fell, meaning her fast slashes never splashed any blood on him. Ulquiorra would definitely be unbothered by it.
According to Shunsui, the original Gote 13 was the strongest in history, largely because of warriors like Unahona, whose combat abilities were unmatched by modern standards, as this highlights her knowledge of countless sword techniques which she has accumulated over centuries. Even Aizen, a character willing to confront multiple captains at the same time, had decided to avoid direct combat with Unahona. Kubo later confirmed through a question and answer on Club Outside that while Aizen believed that he could defeat her, he recognized the battle would be extremely taxing for him.
Unmatched by what standard? When they literally found Zaraki, who's equal or even greater than Unahona during that period. So it's not directly about spiritual pressure, maybe more so about ruthlessness and discipline, which the modern Gote 13 does not match. Kubo only answered in the perspective of Aizen, meaning that's what Aizen thinks would happen if they fought, not that it will absolutely happen. Also, even if we take it literally, then if Unahona can exhaust Aizen while still losing, that means she would have to run out of stamina, which he would then later contradict.
Battle. Hisaguna Itapa takes this further, generating spiritual pressure so dense that Uryu, a Quincy specialized in detecting Reiatsu, noted that it could be hardly identified as Reiatsu anymore. Meanwhile, Unahona's Reiatsu was refined via centuries worth of training and fighting. She had honed this spiritual pressure through countless battles during the formation of the Soul Society.
This is more important than you might think, because the spirit class of spiritual beings are classified based on the density of their spiritual pressure. How else would Unahona hone her spiritual pressure than to make it denser or increase the volume? Pray tell. At this point, only Ulquiorra and Ichigo have been shown to have spiritual pressure that is thick and black, which Orihime cannot reject. The color can simply be an artistic choice, but not when the characters themselves are pointing it out.
Unahona, however, commands a vastly broader arsenal of attacks, spanning offensive swordsmanship, defensive Kido barriers, healing techniques, and hidden weapons.
Swordsmanship and Kido, all unmeasurable feat, we can't actually scale swordsmanship, and it's not even represented properly. We only see the most basic stuff like deflecting and swinging randomly. And Kido is not fully explored. It's set up in a way that characters can just use new Kido we have never seen before for plot reasoning. But we can 100% conclude that those are insignificant because Unahona herself uses dirty tricks, meaning if Kido were effective, we should have seen it. So unless we see it, we can assume it's not effective to use in 1v1 fight.
Unahona's physical strength operates on a different scale. During a fight with Kinpachi, she had deflected her sword swings with her bare hands and feet, showcasing strength that could withstand direct contact with a blade renowned for cutting through anything.
Her feats against Zaraki doesn't say much. Zaraki was still using only one arm, as even pointed out by herself, so her deflecting, not even blocking his sword, is not indicative of her strength, as for some reason, using both arms is additive in Bleach, meaning she merely deflected 50% strength strike, and deflection cost less energy than blocking, meaning she doesn't even show 50% of the strength of Zaraki in that situation. Many characters already match 50% of Zaraki, as even Ulquiorra was able to block Zaraki till he used both of his arms.
They have Unahona, whose adaptation within battle is far more intuitive and fluid. This again is thanks to her mastery of those different sword styles, which enables her to effortlessly adapt and shift her strategy mid-fight. During her training with Kenpachi, she exhibited movement so fluid that her attacks seemed to materialize from nowhere, her blade finding vital points before Kenpachi could even register a strike, and what makes her speed particularly deadly isn't the raw velocity of her attacks, but it's the unpredictability of them, as she can accelerate and decelerate with such precision that predicting her next movement becomes nearly impossible, even for experienced combatants.
I don't think swordsmanship have to do with anything, because it still relied on other stats like speed and strength, meaning if you're not even near the strength of your enemy, it will be completely useless, and also it's not a measurable stat. Zaraki couldn't track her movement where? Or was he overwhelmed by the extra blades which the Minazuki formed? And lastly, it's actually an anti-feat that Unahona used dirty tricks, because the reason she could defeat Zaraki is because she can use her hidden weapons and dirty tricks to injure Zaraki, which would be impossible because Ulquiorra can simply regenerate, therefore wouldn't get affected by the injuries caused by her hidden weapons.
When she was training Kenpachi, she continuously evolved her approach, as when Kenpachi began reading her forward strikes, she had then switched everything up to reverse grip techniques. When he adapted to her speed, she then changed tempo unpredictably.
My brother, it seems like you don't have anything to effectively conclude that she would win. That's why you're desperately focusing on her swordsmanship and fighting style, which we cannot effectively judge due to poor representation. She switched her tempo, when exactly? Or she did the same thing before, slashing randomly? Also, swordsmanship would not work against Ulquiorra because his lance can explode on both forms, melee or range. He have a weapon that bypasses normal sword fight. Enough of this.
His experience fighting against Shinigami, however, is more limited, with his most notable fights being against Ichigo and brief encounters with other Shinigami.
Battle experience? That's another unmeasurable stat. Also, Ulquiorra knows about differences between Shuinpa and Sonido. What else to know about which would tip the scale? Pray tell. Experience with fighting against Shinigami have zero bearing on the outcome, as there's nothing that would put one at an advantage to know about. Like Kido, several captains have fought against higher-ranking Espadas. Not a single Kido is used to defeat them, except for Hachi against Berrigan, which isn't even a normal Kido. And maybe Zanpakuto abilities, but that's unique to the individual, not race. Both Espadas and Shinigami have unique individual abilities. So what knowledge would tip the scale that one who have no experience fighting Shinigami would suffer?
She partook in the first Quincy Blood War against Yhwach's forces over 1,000 years ago, accumulating combat experience against virtually every spiritual entity in the Bleach universe. Most significantly, she honed her skills during Soul Society's lawless formative period, when she was feared as the most diabolical criminal. This suggests that she had fought against the strongest fighters of that era and had thus earned the title of the first Kenpachi.
Unahona's experience in defeating countless residents who didn't even have a Zanpakuto means nothing. And the Quincy's may have just been weaker because they stated they have been getting stronger for centuries in preparation for the invasion, meaning that the Quincy army we saw in Thousand Year Blood War is not the same strength as before. The scale can be anything.
Now, when we discuss their stamina, Ulquiorra's energy reserves are impressive, but they are ultimately finite. His Segunda Etapa transformation, while granting him overwhelming power, appears to place considerable strain on his resources. This is subtly indicated by his reluctance to casually use attacks like Lanza del Relámpago in rapid succession, suggesting that he needs to conserve his energy to maintain this second resurrection despite his otherwise overwhelming power. His fight against Vasto Lord Ichigo, while it was brief, had shown signs of exhaustion from Ulquiorra, especially after he sustained significant damage, which indicates that his regeneration likely consumes a lot of spiritual energy. Contrastingly, Unahona's stamina is on a totally different level. You have to remember that while she was training Kenpachi within Muken, she was not only healing herself, but she was healing Kenpachi, whilst also maintaining a battle against the Kenpachi of this era.
Actually, Ulquiorra didn't want to use Lanza in rapid succession because, as he stated himself, he didn't want to explode it anywhere near him. So after he missed the first one, Ichigo went close to him, so he never got a chance to use it again, which isn't a proof that he can't. Secondly, the only exhaustion we see was after Ichigo already blew his organs away. We don't have accurate anatomy, but since Yama was heavily nerfed due to his missing arm, we can assume that Ulquiorra also lost a significant portion of his spirit energy by losing his organs, so it's not a clear indicator of his lack of stamina. Thirdly, Unahona didn't have infinite stamina either. If you remember the basic principle of Kaido, which is healing Kido, it states that Kaido restores your spiritual pressure to restore your body, meaning that every time Unahona defeats Zaraki, she could take time to restore her energy. So that only works against enemies she could defeat in the first place. Enemies who would give time to replenish her energy.
His analytical approach leads to calculated efficiency, but it lacks adaptability, especially when he is confronted with an irrational opponent. When he fought briefly against Vasto Lordite Ichigo, his entire repertoire of abilities crumbled against the unrestrained, instinctive fighting style of Vasto Lordite Ichigo. It would really be fascinating to see how an analytical opponent like Ulquiorra would fare against the adaptive fighting style of Unahona. Would he be able to instantly identify her fighting patterns, and would he be able to keep up with those 8,000 styles that she has mastered?
I don't know what you're talking about. Ichigo didn't defeat Ulquiorra using fighting styles. He defeats him by overpowering him and using speed techniques that's only available to Hollows.
In terms of the wild card, the Unahona possesses something that Ulquiorra cannot quantify, and this is over 1,000 years of battle experience. This is because she loves the thrill and joy that she experiences from a fight. This will be something that would genuinely confuse Ulquiorra. While Ulquiorra demonstrated some confusion when he fought against Ichigo, who demonstrated resilience out of his desire to protect his loved ones, a concept that Ulquiorra could not comprehend. Unahona's primal enjoyment of the fight represents an irrational variable which Ulquiorra's analytical mind may struggle to process. He's going to be up against a character who's going to be willing to sustain injury in order to deliver a decisive counterattack. This would defy all of the logical risk assessments that define Ulquiorra's combat style.
Ulquiorra can't quantify, or you can't. You repeatedly stated battle experience, but can't even give reason as to why that would affect anything. The outcome of the fight will be ultimately decided by abilities and stats. The mental aspect would bear weight. Only if we have any evidence that Ulquiorra got defeated by his inability to quantify the mentality of his opponents. His ability to fight didn't get affected by his inability to understand the mental state of Hollow Ichigo, as it's a mere curiosity for him.
So like his battle against Ichigo, Ulquiorra would attempt to induce despair through overwhelming force, but this would only heighten the euphoria that Unahona feels from combat. In terms of fundamental combat, despite how much Reiatsu Ulquiorra possesses, I think that Unahona's spiritual pressure carries the weight of 1,000 years of combat refinement. She was strong enough that Aizen had avoided a direct confrontation with her, and I think that this speaks volumes. With all of her experience, especially as a member of the original Gotei 13, I think that Unahona is clearly the winner here. With offensive capabilities, Ulquiorra has an impressive arsenal of attacks, with his visually spectacular abilities like Lanza del Relámpago, as well as Cerro Oscuras, but Unahona's offensive capabilities are equally as impressive, as she was able to repeatedly beat down Kinpachi, someone who was strong enough to defeat the 5th ranking Espada, as well as the 0 ranking Espada Yami. I think even in terms of offense, Unahona has the win over Ulquiorra. When it comes to battle experience, Ulquiorra is very limited, whereas Unahona has had years upon years of experience. Even with regenerative capabilities, with Ulquiorra still having his high-speed regeneration, one major limitation which makes him lose against Unahona in this category is the fact that he cannot regenerate his internal organs or brain. I believe that Unahona's healing abilities, which she had originally learned to prolong and enjoy fights, would definitely give her an edge here, as she once again outperforms Ulquiorra. When we look at that adaptability in combat situations, Ulquiorra has an impressive ability to analyze and identify attack patterns, and to exploit weaknesses with his opponents, but I feel like even he would be unable to keep up with Unahona's insane adaptive fighting style, so once again, she wins in this category. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, when it comes to psychological warfare, Ulquiorra's nihilism would struggle to overcome Unahona's bloodlust. And in terms of any wildcards for Ulquiorra, I don't think that anything matches up to Unahona's experience, her enjoyment for battle, and her durability and stamina. So once again, she is the victor in the wildcard category. From my analysis, I've concluded that Unahona would definitely be the victor in this battle.
Next we have Black Mustache. Let's hear him.
Aizen could have just used his illusion to find a weak spot if Unahona wasn't strong. Neutra implies no one can survive getting stabbed in the head.
Firstly, I will say it again. Kubo mentioned that Aizen believes that he would get exhausted, not that it will absolutely happen. Secondly, yes, that might actually be true, because Aizen didn't really have much combat feats back in SS Arctoshiro. Might be a prodigy, but everyone can agree he's not among the high tiers yet. And even then, had to rely on his illusion. He doesn't have the speed to counteract like Zaraki or Unahona. And no one's arguing that Unahona didn't have the skills. It's just that Unahona doesn't have the durability. because Lanza del Rampalego isn't something that can be counteracted like a normal blade. You would need Ichigo level of durability, which Zaraki and Unahona haven't shown. She might react if Aizen tried to hit her in the head, because Aizen's illusion breaks when touching the blade. So, if one have the reaction speed, can counterattack or prevent fatal damage.
Kubo couldn't have scaled the explosion perfectly in his drawing. If he didn't do the math and scaled it perfectly with perspective and distance in mind, we can't get anything from that, therefore is irrelevant. And the area of the attack doesn't matter when all it did was destroy some rubbles. A gun will shoot through a person's arm, but an explosion that burns the skin in a larger area doesn't have that attack power.
Firstly, that's how we do power scaling. It doesn't matter one bit that the author didn't intend for accurate mathematical calculations and just wanted to draw cool stuff. We take canon material and use it as source. No one here is mistaking shows for reality. We know that it's all fiction. But since it's fiction, that's why we rely on depictions of their feats as facts. They're not real people. We can't actually put them in a ring to fight. You can't just illegitimize feats due to speculations of false depiction. They don't actually exist to check for ourselves. That's why we rely on the author's adaptation of his imagination. It's on the person who claimed the source to be false to provide the proof. So, until Kubo himself is made aware and stated that himself, then we use it as a fact. Secondly, we know that Lanza is not just a technique with bigger area, because it specifically is an explosion. Explosion deals raw force distributed equally in every direction. So the comparison with the bullet which can penetrate an arm versus an explosion that burns the skin on a larger area doesn't work, simply because the explosion showcased force equal or greater to the bullet at every direction. You might be talking about penetrative force, but that also doesn't matter because the way Shinigami's tank attacks is by using their spiritual pressure. They might reinforce areas for defense, but an explosion that will hit them everywhere leaves no spot to focus on.
When you punch through a wall, does the hole match your fist perfectly? Similarly, the explosion reached the edge of the pillar causing the atomic bond to break. Not a big feat because injured Ichigo with 1/3 his Ryatsu survived getting thrown through those pillars, and Unahona is much stronger than that Ichigo, so you need more proof than destroying some pillars.
You're trying to downplay it again, because the point is not about individual material, but the scale of it. So, the logic is that if Ichigo can survive getting thrown through some pillars, that means he can survive a meteor given the same material? Size matters when discussing force and power. Discussing material property is not relevant. What's the point here? A soft clay will retain the shape of the fist more perfectly than a hard rock. So, as I already mentioned, destroying the structure with the exploding force is not a feat in itself, but a general idea of how much powerful it would be if one were to get hit, because force loses its energy through distance by dispersion through air. Ichigo is not a good example, because he have hollow powers, and his spiritual pressure can change instantly by using his hollow powers.
Comparing to random pillars getting destroyed that doesn't happen in the manga is flawed. Chapter 347 proves that all those pillars have a fortress area if that's what you're talking about.
I'll admit, it's my fault that I refer to it as a pillar, because the anime is slightly different and the structure looks closer than in the manga. But once I pointed out the difference, then there's no more problem, but you're still denying it. Unless you're actually blind, the structure is right here. I don't know why you brought up chapter 347. If you're talking about pillars here, then that's the pillars on top of Hueco Mundo, which we can see again in this page. Next we have two people, Zek Frost and SKT.
Vasto Lord Ichigo crushed Lanza with his bare hands, meaning it couldn't be that strong. Aizen knows everything. He also knows about Second Resurrection, and Ulquiorra himself stated there's 3 other espadas stronger than him, meaning their ranks are absolutely accurate.
Firstly, maybe Ulquiorra made the Lanza weaker when Ichigo went close range because we hear Ulquiorra explicitly telling us that he didn't want to explode his lance near himself, which could mean he's keeping it at level manageable by him to prevent it from fatally exploding it near himself. Stark fans have always excused the weak display of his Seros and Wolves. Not even Rose and Love died too, by quoting him that he didn't want to deal fatal shots. So, similarly, Ulquiorra wanted to not explode the Lanza near himself, therefore made it weaker. Or that Vasto Lord Ichigo did crush the fully powered Lanza, but still not proof of weakness, because if we raise our comprehension level a little bit higher, we know that Ulquiorra have developed Pesquisa. He isn't stupid, he knows the Ryatsu level of his opponents, so why was he surprised by that feat? Ulquiorra believed that Ichigo's hollow powers are a mimicry, not actual hollow powers, so he constantly got surprised by Vasto Lord Ichigo using hollow techniques like Sonido and Siro. He also got surprised by Ichigo catching his Lanza by his bare hand, despite him knowing that Ichigo have higher spiritual pressure than him. That only means the Hierro is the one that allowed Ichigo to catch and tank the Lanza, a technique which normal Shinigamis does not possess. Therefore, even at the level of Vasto Lord Ichigo, if you don't have a Hierro, then you couldn't replicate that feat. Secondly, I'm not so sure about that. Ulquiorra stated that there are 3 others stronger than him, but acutely there's 4, because espadas are counted from 0, not 1, meaning if we take the dialogue literally, then there's already a contradiction. We just have to accept that Ulquiorra took Aizen's words literally, with no room for nuance. There's other proof that the rankings doesn't mean much, like Luppy, who wasn't even rank 7, or even in Espada at all, quickly rising to rank 6, because he have the same aspect of death as Grimmjow. And for anyone who claim Aizen also knew about Second Resurrection, because we see the form from the flashback when he's talking to Ichigo, hear this. Aizen also said Vasto Lord Ichigo was transcendent, meaning Ulquiorra fought a transcendent being, which transcendent Aizen wanted to fight, instead of even Zaraki or Unahona. So Ulquiorra was almost equal to a transcendent being. So choose your logic. Now, the true comparison. For power category, Ulquiorra wins. Ulquiorra showcased the most destructive ability only few can match even now. Some people are under the misconception that force doesn't correlate to attack power. But this isn't the case, as we see from the show again and again. And if it's the matter of penetrative power via density, then Ulquiorra also happens to have one of the most dense Ryatsu, which he further condensed into his Lanza. And the range attack, although stated to be hard to control, only missed due to Ichigo dodging it, not that he threw it off target. And what if Unahona can dodge? It won't matter because the situation was very specific for plot reasoning. Ichigo was on higher elevation, so when he dodged it, flew miles away, which wouldn't happen in any other situation, and especially with her Bankai, which would flood the ground. Ulquiorra would fly upwards to throw at her. Unahona, on the other hand, doesn't have much power feat, as her only opponent, Zaraki, have gotten injured by weaker characters. He's not known to have high durability, he just have endurance. And her liquid acid is too limiting, one needs to get drenched in it to take effects, and even after, works too slow to affect someone with regeneration like Ulquiorra. For speed category, Ulquiorra also wins because even though he got surprised by Hollow Ichigo, that was only due to Sonido bypassing Pesquisa, which Unahona can't perform. Unahona is also fast, but she's no flash goddess. The title belongs to Yoruichi, which the databook mentioned Ulquiorra and Yami were in boat trouble when met with. Although Ulquiorra stated due to their injured allies, with Yoruichi's speed and Kisuke's ability could have easily evacuated them if Ulquiorra's speed weren't up there. For swordsmanship, Unahona wins, but as I mentioned, would be quite useless due to Lanza being a good counter for normal swordplay. Unahona can deflect swords, but what's she going to do when the sword can push her back by releasing energy? For durability category, Ulquiorra wins because he have his Hollow Hierro technique, which even without, was already blocking Ichigo's Getsuga Tenshou with his Ryatsu alone. Unahona, on the other hand, have 0 durability feat. Although it's quite impressive, she could deflect 50% strength slash with her bare hands, but she didn't touch the edge, only the sides. She may as well be more durable, but we have no feats to take. For stamina category, it's undecided, because there's no solide feat for either of them. Ulquiorra never fought to exhaustion. He conjured 3 Lanza, the last one after he got his organs blown off, and still destroyed Ichigo's horn. What ultimately killed him was his inability to regenerate his organs, not exhaustion. And for Unahona, she might fight Zaraki for hundreds to thousands of times. But we lost our scale after the first win, because Kaido allows you to replenish your Ryatsu, so she could have regained strength after every win, or even put Zaraki at Ryatsu disadvantage to secure wins. So she can have higher stamina. If she could win in the first place, not very useful in a deathmatch. For psychological warfare category, no one wins because it's a completely irrelevant category made up to wank their preferred character. Neither Ulquiorra nor Unahona lost due to psychological attack in the canon, so it only works to give more illegitimate points to wank their simp goddess. Another useless categories are battle experience and wild card. Also swordsmanship too. We can give these to Unahona, as they're quite useless. Unahona with higher experience and swordsmanship skills lost to a kid Zaraki. Therefore, we can conclude these are completely useless against higher power and speed. Wildcard might be useful, but not against Ulquiorra, because she wouldn't be able to deal chip damage due to regeneration, so wounding him won't decide the battle. Kido can be quite powerful depending on the plot, but even taking plot into account, we can also conclude Kido won't work because of the databook. The databook did mention Ulquiorra could fight Yuruchi and Urahara without no trouble, and Urahara and Yuruchi happens to be Kido masters, so none of their barriers, bindings, and destructive spells would disadvantage Ulquiorra. Let's give all the points in useless categories to Unahona. That still won't make her win. I can conclude that Ulquiorra will definitely win this fight. If you have anything to add, you're welcome to leave a comment.